Welcome back in, everybody. It's another edition of the First and Orange podcast. Parker Gabriel here, Luca Evans there, Broncos beat reporters for the Denver Post. It's the hottest offseason action. Well, at least it's the next offseason action this week. Luca, first week of OTAs. Can you feel the buzz? Is it palpable, or is that just the bowels of the Denver Post building buzzing?
Well, yeah, no, I feel no buzz right now because I'm in the empty part of our newsroom. But I was thinking about it because I just hopped on another podcast with the folks at Believe, and it hit me as I was talking that I've never actually met any of the current guys or seen them play like live in person since taking this job, and so I am excited for that from that standpoint to see things firsthand, which will be interesting, and the new guys too. That'll be the big thing, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot of I'll take this as criticism, Broncos. There's a lot of franchises around the NFL where like the free agent guys, they do like news conferences and they talk to reporters and all of that when they sign in March. Sean Payton, not his way of doing things. So this will actually be, whether it's this week or next week. Well, I think the plan is we'll see one day of practice this week, one day of practice next week, and then mini camp in mid-June, a couple days there. So at some point along the way, we'll probably hear from Talanoa Hufanga, maybe Dre Greenlaw, although the quad injury, if he's not practicing, not sure if he'll talk. We'll see about that. Evan Engram, and then obviously Bo Nix and Sean Payton and some of the sort of staple guys returning too. So it's always good. It's interesting you say that, Luca, because like for you, definitely you get to just sort of see guys on the field and all that. That's Pat Surtain. Yeah, he looks pretty good. It does actually, like, I think it's informative. And it's one of the cool parts about this job among many is that like it's really easy to blow it out of proportion, like what somebody does in OTAs or doesn't do, or if somebody's not there or whatever. But like it is kind of like the real start of the breadcrumbs that you use between now and the end of August to sort of put together what do you really think the team is going to be. How do you see guys' roles, who's primed for a breakout or whatever. And so in that regard, like you never pass up a chance to watch football on the grass.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think just getting a taste of it at rookie minicamp and then, now actually seeing, some of the intricacies of where guys are playing and reps and that sort of thing is going to be really interesting. So I'm excited. I don't really know what to expect, but I'm excited.
There you go. Well, I guess that's sort of what we'll talk about today is just the main things you'll be looking for. So, your first time seeing all these guys in the field, aside from getting the lay of the land, all of that, like when you think about like what you sort of want to, sort out over the next couple of weeks, like where do you start? What do you think the most interesting, starting point for this part of the offseason is for the Broncos?
Yeah, I think the thing that I'm kind of mulling is like, I think one of the key concepts going into the fall is looking, top down at their offense. Do they have the real true skill talent, like to make a dent, to quote unquote dethrone the Chiefs or whatever, can they be a legitimate like dark horse Super Bowl contender with the guys that they have around Bo Nix? And so I think when you look at certain, like we got a glimpse of RJ Harvey. We've talked about him enough potentially as whatever role he's going to play in year one. But then you look at the rest of the backfield, like what role is Audric Estime going to play as a potential complement there? Like what about Jaleel McLaughlin? And then I think the biggest thing for me is the receiver room and, who's going to step up as a legit number two behind, Courtland Sutton. I mean, obviously, Marvin Mims, with the way he ended last year, seems a likely candidate there. But, are he and is Troy Franklin going to, develop more of the Oregon rapport with Bo Nix? Like, is Devon Vele going to get more targets out of the slot? How does Evan Engram in total, elevate this group? I think all those questions for me are certainly what I'm most interested in heading into OTAs.
Yeah, it's interesting because last year, like the sort of dominant storyline, obviously it was like Bo Nix, just drafted and then sort of like hitting the ground running with the whole group rather than just rookie minicamp, but it was the whole group minus Cortland Sutton because Sutton skipped all the voluntary stuff last year. And so and then got a sort of minor contract adjustment and all of that. He's still waiting on the extension, but obviously he said he's going to be part of a part of the offseason program this year. He's been around so far. We expect obviously he'll be there when we're out there later this week. So that's, to me, it's like they obviously developed a good rapport. Like there's a lot of time. Like the thing about it is like there's a lot of time in training camp. The detail work in the season obviously is real, but it can't hurt for Bo Nix to have, sort of like the full off season, not just with the young receivers, but with Sutton too. And then frankly, just simply, it can't hurt Bo Nix to have a full off season where like he knows he's the guy, even though we all sort of figured that eventually he would be named the starter last offseason. They really did split reps through OTAs, mini camp, and then the first couple weeks of training camp. And so like, it's his team in a way that it wasn't at this time last year. They're his reps in a meaningful way that they weren't last year. So all of that is like that I think it'll feel much more settled this year. Even if the end result seemed pretty inevitable, both with Bo Nix and Cortland Sutton at this time last year. So, I mean, that's all good news, obviously, for the offense. And then, like you said, I mean, a lot of it is sort of seeing how the new pieces, fit into the puzzle. Because theoretically, like, there's some new guys even offensively where you figure like they're going to have massive roles this offseason or this season.
Yeah, and I think if we're talking about Bo a little bit too, there's a few interesting, threads to pull at in terms of what to expect, just in terms of kind of the offseason transition into year two. I mean, he, I think when you look at just where he was last year, like he had, Heisman campaign at Oregon, deep playoff run, right into pre-draft, right into rookie minicamp, right into off-season work, right into camp. Like it was nonstop, just back to back to back to back to back. And this is the first kind of off-season or stretch that he's had in a while where he's gotten to like recover, kind of go back to the drawing board a little bit. I think that that's not the flashiest storyline, but it is, I think, relevant and important to his development that like he's had an off season to reset, knowing he's the guy, knowing like mentally, that defenses are going to attack him in different ways in year two. Like to start thinking about that, he's going to have the full complement, and like you said, all the reps going into camp. And so I think that is going to be interesting too, to see him as, almost in a veteran sense where yes, he's going into year two, but he's established now. And how does he command like this group?
It's sort of interesting because Davis Webb, the Broncos quarterbacks coach, told me last year that when Bo got drafted, he gave him like a 15-page outline of sort of all kinds of stuff, from just like words of wisdom to suggestions and like all this stuff. And basically he said like, the goal for him and Jared Stidham and Zach Wilson last year was to help Bo like skip as much of the learning curve as possible. But one of the things that was in that document was like he gave him like the off-season training programs that like Josh Allen used and that Patrick Mahomes used, like two of his best friends. And so one of the things, I don't know how much Bo will go into it, but like one of the things I'm sort of interested in is like just simply like how much more calm sort of it was with your family for like not having to do all the pre-draft stuff obviously all the spring, but also like did he train the same way he trained last year? Did he change things? Did he like there's all this sort of like say you can kind of go back and say, okay, I thought this really worked for me. I didn't like how this was sort of day by day, week by week, up. How similar was it, or is it now? So all that I think will be or at least it matters, regardless of whether we want to sort of have back on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I think for me, I'm curious to, on the defensive side of the ball, just, I know we're not going to see Dre Greenlaw, obviously, but getting a sense as to how. And I think when you look at like historically how people talk about Talanoa Hufanga, like kind of just a spark defensively, like in the secondary. Obviously, he's not going to be flying around hitting guys, crunching guys in OTAs necessarily, but
that would be bad if he did that.
That would be very bad. But he is that kind of guy. Like when you talk, like he'll put his body on the line. That's why he's gotten hurt so much as he has. But just kind of that free flowing, that energy. I'm interested to see how that kind of translates to the guys next to him in the secondary. And yeah, I mean, just getting a chance to see that, and then how Jahdae Barron's going to fit into that mold as well. I think there's a lot of interesting kind of defensive focal points to keep an eye on. What are you interested in, on that side of the ball?
Yeah, I think inside linebacker, mostly because we're not expecting to see Dre Greenlaw with the quad injury. As we've reported, and then Sean said at rookie minicamp, it's going to hold him out for a while, but he should, Sean said he would be, sort of full go by the time training camp started in July. Obviously that's still 2 months from now. So, I'm interested to see if Alex Singleton does anything, even if he's just out there with his helmet and runs around a little bit, because when I talked to him a couple of weeks ago, he sort of hinted at that. He said, we have practice in a few weeks and you guys can all see where I'm at. He's 7.5 months, I guess now, post ACL surgery last year. So, I don't think they'll let him, fully uncork it here in OTAs. There's just not much of a reason to do that. But, he was like, his eyes lit up talking about getting fitted for his helmet. So there's this element of it'd be interesting to see sort of, how much he does over the next few weeks. But also if you take as sort of fact that as long as they're healthy, Greenlaw and Singleton are the starting inside linebackers. Mm-hmm. If neither of them are participating much over the next few weeks, that means a ton of reps for Drew Sanders probably. Yeah. And then Justin Cernat, who they brought back and who played a lot more than, anyone expected defensively last year. So to me, I think that's a sneaky area where a young guy, whether it's Lavelle Bailey, who's now, been on the team for a year, or one of the several Jordan Turner, J.D. Brown, Karen Reed, these guys that they brought in undrafted, that's a position where one of those guys could make a team. And so I'm just kind of it's going to be interesting to see what that picture looks like, especially considering the fact that you've got a new position coach in Brian Niedermeyer, and the two guys who you are hoping play a lot this fall, by and large, not doing much over the next few weeks.
Yeah, and I think to your point, even just looking beyond the next few weeks, you need contingency plans for two guys who played, what was it, 6 total games last year, something like that. You need bodies in that room. You need proving, and I think bringing back Cernat certainly helps from that standpoint. But I mean, they will be a better team if Drew Sanders, if that transition that Sean Payton has talked about from outside to inside, if he shows progress there in camp, if like you said, one of the younger guys kind of steps up and asserts himself and puts himself in position to make a team going into camp, I think that's going to be a definite area to pinpoint. And then I mean, just defensive line wise, I mean, there's just the constant question of the question hanging over the cloud of who gets extended and who doesn't. And I mean, I don't anticipate that we would see anyone skip the OTAs for a contract holdout like we're seeing across the league and what have you. But when you look at Nick Benito and Zach Allen and John Franklin Myers, there is an extra motivation for them heading into camp and next year and that sort of thing. So I'm interested to see how that all plays out as well, kind of in the next couple weeks.
For sure. I think if you were think if you were ranking the likelihood that someone wouldn't be around, that Franklin Myers would be on the top of that list. But I agree with you that I don't think that's really going to be an issue. And like, it's always where I say this every year, and fans are always like, they don't care, but like, it's voluntary. It's voluntary. Like now, almost everybody's there, and some get like Cortland, like clearly he was making a point, and then he said as much at the mandatory mini camp when he was there in June. That, yeah, I did that to try to make a point. And so like, that's fine. Guys do that. That's their prerogative, but like, it is voluntary. So like, if someone's not there was actually, I guess it was last year, cause they like traded for Franklin Myers during the draft. And then it was like I think it was the first day we were there, same sort of setups, like the end of the week, and he wasn't there. And it was like, what happened? Like, is he hurt? Is he this and that? And it's like, no, he was running his, a kids camp that he does every year, I think in Texas. Yeah. And so he had skipped Thursday to like go down there and do that. And like, if you were asking the coaches, like, would you prefer your guys don't skip days of OTAs? Like, sure, of course. But like, stuff comes up and it's the off season. And so, we'll see about all that. But I think you're right. Like that's, defensive line, I was actually just writing about them today. Like that they have a chance to be really, really good. Like, Zach Allen's coming off the best year of his career. They re-signed DJ Jones. Now you put Savion Jones kind of like in that mix. Obviously, you've got, Franklin Myers and Malcolm Roach. Right now, as we sit here today, it's contract year for Franklin Myers, for Roach, and for Zach Allen. So, like, will that be the same come August or when the season starts? Probably not. You'd think that Zach for sure, would be in line for an extension, and then we'll see, how they decide to approach the rest of that group too. But like, that is always something this time of year that will come up. Questions will come up, with Zach Allen, with Franklin Myers, with Benito, with Cortland. Like, it's part of the deal in the offseason. Last year, the Broncos got Quinn Miners done in July. Pat Surtain, like literally, Wednesday of week 1 preparations. So we haven't heard much that would suggest that they're like real deep into negotiations with any of these guys yet. But a lot of times, like once those conversations start, it's not like a 6-month process to get it done. Like, you talk for a couple of weeks, you're in the same ballpark, and boom, something happens. Like, relatively quickly. You did some comparing over the weekend on some of those guys. So, who do you think of that group, Luca? Who do you think is who's the cleanest, quote unquote, to get done? Like looking at it from the outside. Yeah. And are there any of them where the numbers are a little bit more complicated or harder to figure out?
I think the simplest, just looking from a market standpoint, and there is a little bit of variance, but I mean, Cortland Sutton, when you look at like comparables in terms of the last couple of years, like, it's a little bit different, but like 24, Calvin Ridley was 29 when he signed his extension. I think it was 22 mil a year per, had like nearly the exact same stats as Cortland Sutton did that year. Did last year. And so, I think just with his type of mold is like kind of wide receiver 1 production, but, can play that role. Maybe not necessarily an ideal,
right.
Top,
very good, not a true number 1, maybe
top guy. I think the market is pretty set on that for the most part. I did have someone like make the comment to me that, teams have to understand that, the new 10 to 15 million for a receiver is now 20 to 25 million. And obviously, Sutton is not going to have that kind of bargaining power as he would in the open market, but I would expect him. I think it's fair when you look at like recent year extensions and compare that to salary cap inflation and that sort of thing, that like, it would seem that he lands around like the low end of 20 million, possibly a year. Now and then the difficult thing with Nick Benito is like no guy his age, in the last couple of years who's had, free agent extension done and that sort of thing, has had like the production that he had last year, coming up like 13 and a half sacks, just out the raw numbers going into next. And so you could, like, realistically, I think all these guys are floating somewhere in the 20 to 25 million range. And then you can project based off market, based off this or that. Like, I made this point, I think, the um, Milton Williams deal, like by the Patriots in the offseason, it's certainly not comparable, like exactly to Zach Allen in terms of production, in terms of age. Certainly, Milton Williams is younger in terms of even just sheer position and role. But when you look at like, okay, he gets $26 million a year. As Zach Allen's agent, like realistically, how can you ask for less than
Right.
that?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you know, and certainly things will come into play in negotiation there. But I think like just off looking at the market, I think it's possible that Zach Allen gets the highest average value of those guys. I would go Allen, Bonito, Sutton right now
Yeah.
if I just had to throw an educated guess out there. That's not sourced to any of them specifically, but I think, but I think the most variance would come into play with Bonito.
Yeah.
So it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out.
It's funny because they're all at different points in their career. And, I guess for Sutton and Zach, they're like similar age and they're going to third contracts.
Yeah.
But even still, like different positions, different, points in their career to some degree. And yet, like if you told me at the end of the day that each one of them, I think I said this to you last week, like if you told me at the end of the day that each one of them got 24 million a year, it would sort of like
makes sense.
Yeah, it would make sense. Not to say that that's what's going to happen, but like the edge market is a little bit hard to peg just because I mean, like Myles Garrett reset it by such a large gap this year, 40 million a year average, and you got I think like 124 million guaranteed.
Yeah.
It's just a massive deal. He's 30. If you look at the top guys there, Garrett and Daniel Hunter are both on the far side of 30. And then like, you've got like the Max Crosbys and TJ Watts of the world. And you could look at it and say, obviously Nick Bonito doesn't have that kind of track record at this point, but like if you were his representation, you would also be saying, well, yeah, he's 25.
Upside.
Yeah. And he's got upside to, and who says he's not that kind of player? So like,
and then, if I were the Broncos, I would counter and be like, and this isn't exactly applicable, but I would counter and be like, well, Greg Rousseau just got 20 million a year. An extension from the Bills, same exact. I think they're both 25. Not the sack production that Nick Bonito had last year, but kind of like he was a first round guy. Nick Bonito was a second round guy.
Yeah.
So you have like varying scales. You have I think the most range in Nick Bonito's case. And the thing we didn't mention with Zach Allen too is like, and I know you've touched on this plenty just in our conversations, but like, is he going to do what he did last year again? Like there's, such a gap in terms of his resume overall, his whole body of work compared to last year. Like, do you pay him based on that? Do you pay him based on factoring that into the total body of work? Like where does he lie? So I think that's another really interesting question.
Yeah. And then like with Bonito, you have the fact that, the franchise tag specter is out there since he's the only one of the group that's like, going into the last year of a rookie deal. But you don't have the like a lot of times the fifth year option. It seems like it serves as sort of like an anchor point for negotiations. Like Pat Surtain, his fifth year option was 20 million, and so you can cast aside. I mean, he was going to probably reset the market anyways, but like a lot of times, if a fifth year option is picked up for a first round pick, you can cast aside the notion of like going lower than that because the player knows that they've got that guaranteed, and then the 1 year tag, but you want the certainty, and so. Bonito has none of that. Obviously, the tag would be in play. It's a big number. It'll be a big number a year from now for edge rushers and all that. But like, I don't think, even though like Franklin Myers and Nick Bonito have like, made some noise on social media and all of that, like over the offseason, like I don't think it's near hand wringing time, like for any of these guys and the Broncos at this stage in the offseason. So, it's sort of like a waypoint in that regard, but usually the finish line is like nowhere to be seen, and then suddenly, boom, there it is, it's close. So that tends to be how it goes.
You don't think we're getting a Micah Parsons saga in Denver?
I can tell you one thing: I doubt Greg Penner will tell any reporter that he doesn't know who these guys' agents are.
Yeah.
Even if that were to be true, which I would sort of doubt, but even if it were, that would not be something that would be uttered on the record, I wouldn't imagine. But it's a different world down there in Dallas. Altogether. closing thoughts. Of the newcomers, Luca, who are you interested in seeing? I know we've touched on a couple of them, but what are you interested in over the next few weeks?
I just kind of want to from just a sheer I just want to see how Hufanga plays, what he looks like running around, so I just think there's such an opportunity for him to be, Denver's defense already has so many leaders, and I don't know that he is a vocal leader type of guy, but just as it's an emotional heartbeat who's gonna just make a play to kind of turn everyone up. He is that guy. So I think just seeing his energy, how he just moves, approaches things, and then I think the most obvious one to me is just Evan Ingram and whatever we'll be able to see of the utilization of him, or just kind of the chemistry between him and Bo Nix, I think is going to be the most, obvious thing. And then I'm curious to see how, we saw RJ Harvey and his quads in the wild, but what's he going to look like in his first steps in an actual offense. So yeah, all those three, I would say. What about you?
Yeah, I was going to say Ingram, just because I don't think, obviously, you don't build, a deep rapport in a couple of weeks or whatever, but he and Bo Nix will obviously be sort of one of the things that gets, sort of watched and tracked and talked about through training camp in the preseason, is just kind of how quickly they get that connection sorted out and all of that, and sort of place him in within the rest of the receivers will go a long way in sort of determining how big of an impact he makes in year one. And then I guess maybe because I took some time the last few days to write a story about the punter, I would say, show me, the thing about I will say, first of all, when you take a guy who averaged 47 yards a punt at Florida, and then, his coach said he thought he had 20 to 30% left in him, I'm interested to see what that looks like at altitude, just, the ability to turn the ball over and punt directionally and all that. But I think the underrated part of this is that Will Lutz has been among the most consistent place kickers in football the last 2 years with the Broncos. And he's had the same operation the whole way. Riley Dixon was his holder. Boney was snapping. 2 of those 3 are going to be different this offseason for Boney, recovering from back surgery, I think. So they've got a different long snapper and a new holder. It's pretty far in the weeds for May, but I just they lost a game at Kansas City because they had a field goal blocked, and so rookie punter, big leg, all that's great, but he's also going to be the guy, putting the ball down some point this fall when the game's on the line. So that's not we're not going to come out of an OTA practice and be damn, he's a good holder, but it is something that will matter when the chips are down at some point during the season.
Get ready for Denver Post live tracker from OTAs. Jeremy Crawshaw. Holding watch. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely true. I think to that point too, I don't know how much realistically we would see of this, but Darren Rizzi has pretty well, I don't know if I would say overhauled, but just reconstructed what this special teams unit is going to look like. When you take into account Trent Sherfield and Sam Franklin, the guys they signed in the offseason, the guys they drafted even, who they have talked about making an impact on special teams, like Q Robinson. I think just seeing the early stages of how those units are going to come together, because I mean it's going to be an important, I think less sexy but important thread to pull at, heading into the fall.
Yeah, Sean talks all the time about how important special teams are, and he backs it up in terms of the time they spend on it and the resources they put into it. And they it's maybe gone a little under the radar, but they've fully overhauled. Week is gone, Mike Westhoff's gone, Chris Banjo's gone. It's a whole clean slate there, and they were pretty good the last 2 years. So that'll be obviously important to track, and it also always makes a big difference in terms of end of August, who actually makes the roster. So check back denverpost.com after we're out there for the first OTA practice for the Jeremy Crawshaw tracker. Among other things, all the latest, honestly. denverpost.com/Broncos will have you covered out there this week, next week, the week after, all of training camp. maybe even a little bit of the summer in between those two things. So that's Luca. I'm Parker. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you next week.